Thanks for listening to Fluff and Crunch, where we talk about the connection and sometimes disconnect between system, setting, and story in tabletop RPGs. All right. Hello, Chris. How are you?
Hi, Jeremy. Yeah, I'm fine. How are you?
I'm doing all right, actually. Allergy season has kicked in with a vengeance. All the beautiful blooms on all the trees and all the cacti and all that. It's so nice to look at, and then you walk outside and it's not nice. It's still nice to look at. It's just not nice.
No one in America realizes that is such an American saying.
What?
When people talk about allergy season. So we had this when we went to America. Oh yeah, allergy. Oh, there's loads of allergy. It's allergy season. Oh, there's allergens around. And if you're British, you're like, okay, you realize there's allergens around all the time because people are allergic to, milk and apples and weird stuff.
I don't breathe apples
pets,
or milk though.
They're always there. So what we call it it's still a stupid phrase. In the UK, we refer to it as hay fever, which obviously is stupid because it's not hay.
Right.
But that's what people in the UK refer to. It's like, hay fever. Oh, people talk about the pollen count being high.
Yeah.
It always makes me giggle. People, Americans, Oh, it's allergy season. Yeah, that's all year.
That's all the time. It's just
allergies all the time.
When all this stuff blooms out here, that's when it comes to get me. But otherwise, good.
Yeah, I'm usually all right with that.
How's did you get any gaming in this last week?
Trying to remember. No, because Scott said he was busy with work. So I'm trying because we did record last week. So no, I haven't since last week. I have not done any gaming.
Okay.
So no. How about you?
I did not actually. Last Saturday, my regular game is Saturday nights, and Saturday during the day, I was the game club that I sponsor at this high school in this district. They put on a game day,
all right,
for a charity fundraising game day, and drew some people, had some people from the school and other folks from the community show up and play games during the day. So I was at the school from like 7:30 in the morning till like 5:30 that night. So no game on Saturday for me because I was done at that point.
But doesn't that mean you were running games all day?
No, I was actually when you run a game convention or game day or something like that, you don't get to play games. What you do is you run around, you make sure everyone else is able to play games. And I knew that that's what was coming.
Disappointing.
No, it was cool though, actually. All these kids, some of them played Magic, a couple of them played Mech Warrior, or BattleTech. But the overwhelming majority of the rest of them have, aside from board games, they have only played 5th edition. Like to them, D&D is like what Kleenex is to tissue. It's like they don't even think that there's anything beyond it. And so it was neat that, like, for example, some guy showed up and had 5 Werewolf the Apocalypse characters made. And cool. I cajoled a group of these kids into playing. They had never played any non-5e role-playing game. And then they sat down and played Werewolf the Apocalypse. So it was cool. It was neat to see people get to, at least in a couple of cases, have some opportunities to do something genuinely new for them.
I was thinking about this the other day because one of the things that if you say, do you know what D&D? People are, well, vaguely, because people have seen it in, Big Bang or Stranger Things, or they've heard of Critical Role. So people do have this idea. The minute you say tabletop role playing, people have no idea what that means. So you have to say, like Dungeons and Dragons.
Right.
Oh, right. Yeah. But then if you try and say like, well, there's other kinds of role playing. Again, people, I don't understand. So it's good, but it's awkward, this thing that like, it's a gateway to other role playing games that a lot of people never seem to get past. People just play D&D.
Yeah.
And I never did that because I kind of, I knew what D&D and I found D&D, and then I got the magazine that was for D&D, and it had all this other stuff in. I wish Dragon magazine still existed in a that kind of form. I guess magazines don't really exist in that format.
Not really. But anyway, when you present and manage something like that, you don't get to take part in it. You just flit around and make sure that other people are able to. So it was good. It was good. But we're going to talk about something I think interesting today. And actually it connects a little bit to something that I'm doing on the side. The sample adventure that I'm writing for Eris has a bit of a kind of a horror-ish vibe to it. So this is going to be useful for me. We're going to talk about, like we've done with fantasy and like we've done with science fiction, we're going to talk about some of the tropes and the challenges and the and some ideas for horror, which is
Yeah.
really its own thing.
It's funny because when I said we'd do horror initially, I was like, this is going to be all Jeremy because I don't play horror. You know, but most of us think I've never run or played Call of Cthulhu, so I know nothing about horror. And then I kind of sat and thought about, well, I remember an entire campaign I ran. Okay, yes, this is a lie. I ran a whole campaign where the bad guy was Cthulhu, but then this was a campaign where it was kind of like modern pulp. You know, at the end they kill Cthulhu by driving an oil tanker into him and blew it up. So it's not really horror. But you know, then I've run
Eric taking
Strahd.
on the Sea
Yeah,
Witch and Little
but
Mermaid.
yeah, it was very much like that. I've run Strahd, which was horror to start with before it just went into D&D, and you know, I've done Eclipse phase, which has horror elements to it, and you know, bits of Conan has horror. I've played Ghostbusters, which definitely is not horror. Well, it's weird because they try and make it do both. It's, you know, it's comedy horror, so it's bits of, so I have on and off dabbled in horror. Oh, and I've played the Alien games, which just for straight up body count.
I think though, I think what you're getting at, or what I'm hearing is, and I think what's important, especially as a GM, is you're sitting down and thinking, like genre and vibe, really at the foundation. What kind of story are you going to work within? That horror is not just horror is unique as a genre, and the vibe and the storytelling mode and how things unfold and how the plot functions. I think horror is distinct. You can't just say, well, because there were, like, you know, you play fifth edition and you put in zombies, skeletons, or even a vampire. Like that doesn't mean it's horror.
No,
It's more than just the foes, the enemies, the challenges. It's a lot more than that.
Yeah, I think you've used the word. I think horror is very much. We'll come on to sort of horror tropey things and horror missions. I think you said the word vibe. I think that's the most important thing for horror. When we played Strahd and the first couple of sessions, we made sure the main lights in the room that I play, and they're very bright, so we turned all the main lights off.
Okay.
So then we had, like, you know, it sounds stupid, but it makes a difference. Instead of being very, very bright, we played with, like, you know, sort of like the fairy lights around the room, and then like another light, which Scott had to bring because he couldn't read his character sheets. And we played, like, you know, spooky music in the background, and then it's, you know, it's building the vibe thing, having there's a you know, there's a wolf howl, but then nothing happens. There's a noise in the background, the kind of stuff, you know, the building thing. It's that kind of background stuff. But yeah, on top of that, I think the other thing I'd add is I think there are different kinds of horror. So werewolf and vampire are good examples of this, where they're not really, you know, I don't see them as horror games, partly because you're the thing that's meant to be scary. Right. But you can then, you can do it as a different kind of, because you can do this very kind of personal horror, kind of what am I willing to give up? What am I willing to lose? If I'm a vampire or werewolf, am I going to just kill people left, right, and center? Which the trouble is that that's what you do in all other role-playing games. So it's not an issue. So, but you know, that what am I going to, you know, the whole losing your humanity thing. So that's kind of this personal horror, which is, you can play that as a very horror thing. It's just a very different kind of horror that you're going for. It's, you know, that's not about you being, you know, that's not about the GM scaring the players. That's almost about, like, the players scaring themselves with, what am I willing to do? But it's, I think it's difficult, that kind of thing, because most players are like, I'll just kill everyone. I don't care. There's no consequences.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. You're what someone might hold up. I think if you were to ask gamers, like, well, what do you hold up? What's a classic horror role playing game? They're gonna roll out Call of Cthulhu, and I think that those White Wolf titles would be mentioned as well. But I agree with you. I actually don't think they are not horror.
I kind of feel like the other, something like Call of Cthulhu and other things will be horror, not necessarily because there's nasty things, but something that's the player's going to find unsettling or creepy or scary. I think in Vampire Werewolf, it's so much less on the GM making the players scared, and I feel like it's a lot more on putting the players in situations where, are they going to do the things that slowly their humanity is going to disappear.
I think one of the things about horror has got to be there's the loss of the attrition of humanity, or the sense that you as the individual, or you as a person, that you have lost control, and that you call it in like either the literal food chain or like the cosmic food chain, that man is unseated from top billing. I think that's a part of horror. I mean, I think Cthulhu, the mythos horror, does that by saying, that humanity is this insignificant thing that just is not even incidental to these elder gods. And so that upends our sense of how important we are in the universe. The loss of control, as like a ghost haunting a house, that things are happening that you don't have control over, things that are happening that you think you understand. I think this is another element of horror. You think you are in control and you think you understand what is going on around you, but the truth is something else is going on that is far more in control or more powerful than you are, and you're going to get it soon enough. I think that those are elements to it, and that's where you lose all of those things, and you're not doing horror anymore and you can have scary things, but you're not doing horror when the players, the characters, are able to really firmly control something completely and protect themselves or stop something. Like, I think when you have that sense of control, you lose horror as a
I think that's why horror gaming is really difficult, because generally a lot of role playing is a power fantasy. I'm going to do something that I can't do.
Correct.
Now, in horror games, it's more about there's going to be things there that aren't there in the real world. But most players want to be able to, defeat the bad guy and save the day. And then if you can do that, then then it's not always going to be that scary. And one of the most awkward things I think in a horror game, and this is why I like, you're not keen on the Alien, but I really like the Alien games. Is because one of the things that's going to happen in most, not all, but in a lot of horror films, is there will be a body count. People need to die to tell people that this is a threat.
Die or they need to suffer.
Or there they need to suffer.
Consequences. People need to be corrupted.
They need to go mad, end up in prison.
Yeah, beautiful, innocent things need to be like defiled or despoiled or destroyed. Those kinds of things have to happen. I think you're right. If there's an escapist tough guy vibe to it, the horror disappears, unless there is great cost. To get to the point where you can exercise your Chuck Norris, your inner Chuck Norris, and just like gun the thing down. There must be great sacrifice that takes place to get to that, to like unlock that. But it is hard.
Having played Alien twice, the first time was the second time they were playing as Marines. And there wasn't really a lot of, it was mostly just the aliens didn't come until later on. And it was just bloodbath, they all die. It was much better the one I did. I don't know which one it was, but it was one of the earlier ones where, they were part of a crew and there was only one alien, and but just slowly, one by one, their players are getting whittled down. And sometimes it's by, each other, or those panic rules where you're not just shooting everyone.
Started.
But at the time it was good, because they were scared of like, what do I do? Should we go in here? Should we not go in here? And they did get scared for their characters, because they were like, we know that we could die at any moment. And then that kind of thing puts people on edge. So
I think it's hard too in a lot of games where there's a great deal of meta knowledge. Like, and this is why any longtime D&D players, it's really hard to threaten them. It's really hard to scare them, because everyone knows what the goblin can or can't do, and everyone knows, well, that's that ability. There's so much meta going on that you can't scare the players by removing control from them. And one of the ways that you can remove a sense of control for them is put them in a situation where they're dealing with unknowns. They're like, I don't know what that thing is. The player is thinking, okay, I don't know what that is. I can't deconstruct this from having read the monster manual umpteen times.
And that's one of the advantages of D&D, is that you can just make up monsters on the fly.
Sure.
Yeah, you throw a vampire or a werewolf or most undead at people, be like, swing. Then you kind of go, oh, you don't do as much damage as you expect to. Oh, right, okay, it's resistant to non-magical. I'm going to switch to my magical weapon, or I'm going to use silver, or I'm going to use magic, and so they're not scared by it. But actually, if you can start, it's not being damaged at all.
Yeah.
crap. There are things you can do, but I think that idea of taking away some of the players' tricks or their control is a good one. The minute you can put a player in a situation where the outcome isn't guaranteed, or they don't know what's going to happen, then
Or
it's the unsettling thing.
they're finely tuned to optimize combinations of feats and talents and abilities and plus one this that when the nail, that the hammer they use to hit every nail, when that hammer doesn't work, a good player is going to go, oh, okay. Bad player is just going to get frustrated. But yeah,
So
okay. What about some of the tropes? Let's focus on that. Like I've got my haunted house behind me
I
with
was going to say you've got well, I've
raven.
kind of got one. It doesn't be Vader, but like, you know, if we go a lot of horror films, the single scary bad guy,
Sure.
the Jason Voorhees, Michael Myers, Freddy, the you know, the Scream Killer, although they always turn out to be idiot humans, but
Right.
so that's a trope. Actually, I don't think you don't see that very easily in role-playing games.
Well,
Mostly,
no, when you say the one big bad guy, I think that yeah, Michael Myers, Jason, like the single source of threat
yeah,
is one figure. It's
yeah.
one figure. I mean,
I think that'd be really hard to doing it, that because in a film that's a trope, but in a
yeah,
game, and again, I think it massively depends what game you've like. I don't think you can drop that in. Well, that's not true. You can drop it because Strahd is kind of like that in a thing. If at lower level you tried to fight, you die.
yeah.
You
But
straight up die.
Strahd has all kinds of minions, and there's all kinds of weirdness that exists in Barovia that's because of
Yeah.
Strahd, or in reaction, well, it's because of Strahd.
Well, I mean, I put Strahd up against them very, like literally at the start, like session 1 or 2, they met Strahd, and I did it in a way that to make it realize straight away they couldn't do
Right.
anything. Their only option was to sort of barricade themselves into a church and hope he went away.
Yeah.
Because they
Well,
realized he was so super powerful. So that even in a game like D&D, it is still possible. But the idea of running, you know, the thing's going to keep coming back and back and back and back. I don't think that works it won't be a mission, right? You're going to go somewhere. There's the thing. It's killing everyone. It just keeps killing everyone.
right.
And you're going to, but yeah, like a monster, a monster thing. And there's a monster killing people. That's a trope.
Well, I think you could approach that a couple of different ways. If the monster's killing people, then it's a question of an investigation or a search or tracking to find the thing and then confront it. That's really simple. If it's something that the monster's killing people and they have to track it down, and then there is a twist that you can't kill it or you can't subdue it without doing this other thing. So
I think that's super important. I mean, I was thinking about Supernatural. That's like almost every episode of Supernatural is there's something bad happens and they go and do it. If straight away they worked out what it was and could stop it, those episodes would be very short.
right.
Almost always there's just
Like if they always had the answer going in.
Yeah.
So you
But
can add a twist by providing this thing. Here's this problem, this creature or thing that is, you know, either corrupting people, killing people, running, whatever. It's doing its bad thing. They find that out. They identify what it is, and then they get the twist of, yeah, you need this thing to go deal with it. There's that.
I think the other thing you brought up there is, I think there's one thing you see a lot in horror, from what I know of Call of Cthulhu, I haven't really played, is investigation.
Yes.
You see the thing, but then you got to work out what is the thing or what's the history. Like if it's a ghost, you know, a good ghost story would be like, right, okay, there's a ghost. What does the ghost want? Why is the ghost here? What, like, and then you said it, then it's going. So it you know, a horror thing might be a lot of having to talk to people and look in things to find out what what are we going to have to do. But now again, then that's a horror trope, but that it doesn't sound scary at all. So I think
I think in that though, I mean,
we'll have to do that separately.
Whether something is scary is going to be a matter of presentation, buy-in, and the atmosphere that you mentioned a bit ago. I think you as GM you have to present it in a way that, like, once it becomes whatever the scary thing is or the thing you're trying to make scary, once it becomes blunt and obvious, it's not scary anymore. Like it can shock you. You know, the alien jumping out and biting someone's head off and then disappearing quickly, like that can shock you, but it can cause tension, but it's no longer scary in that because like there's different flavors of scary. Like there's creepy, which for me is something that it sits in the background and it tickles at the back of your head, and it builds up over time. But creepy gets blown away when you have an M60 and you're shooting at Freddy Krueger.
That makes things well, unless none of the bullets hurt him, and then yeah. Well, but you're right, it's not creepy anymore.
No, it's not creepy anymore.
That's the kind of stuff that needs to be ideally held till later. I think we'll cycle back to the how to make it scary. So what other kind of tropes we got? So you've got a haunted house. Yeah, that's a pretty set. There's a place you need to go because something's happening there. Right. And again, that could be an investigation when you go there, or it could be a finding a thing, or it could be there's lots of different ways. But that's,
I think, and you and I, we mentioned this when we talked about sci-fi and fantasy tropes. There are classics that are entirely workable and are not cliched if done well, and you twist just a bit. I mean, a haunted house, I'm just using as just a generic term for haunted location. But don't be afraid of using an actual house. But a haunted location, I mean, that could be either there's something going on there that we have to deal with either because like we're beholden to deal with it. Like if you're I ran this game, I mean, this was like 20 years ago. I used the World of Darkness rules to run a hunter campaign where they worked for the Catholic Church. They went around and did stuff. So you, by virtue of who you are, you're going to go, we're going to go to this place and deal with this because bad things are happening there. You could need to go to this place because bad things are happening there and they're beginning to spill out into areas that are of concern to you. Or maybe something has been drawn there that you have to go get, like the dumb teenagers, go and disappear in said haunted house and you have to go retrieve them from it. But I think that I think those kinds of tropes like that one is perfectly useful. Just kind of twisted enough to make it fresh.
Well, I mean, like for a sci-fi, because if we do a sci-fi horror, that you have it's like an event horizon. You have there's a haunted spaceship. It's not obviously it's not haunted, but there's something on the. That's Alien again. Arguably, Alien is like a mix of these two. Particularly the second one, there's a planet they go to where there's some things. I mean, that Alien stops being horror very quickly, whereas the first one's a horror film.
Totally.
Because you don't see the thing until the end.
No, the second one has shocks.
Yes.
That can make you jump, and those jump scares are really useful in horror movies. But just because there's a jump scare from something horrific doesn't mean that it's horror. And Aliens is absolutely not horror. Great movie, but not horror. But back to a haunted house or haunted location, a mine, whatever. What do you think you could do to make that fresh and not cliched, but still rely on the trope to help communicate what's going on?
I think one of the things is like, what is the form of the haunting? If it's just a ghost or a bunch of ghosts in the house, that's nothing new. Well, what happens if it's the house itself? Like literally the physical house itself it's like like alive. It can move. The doors, walls can move, and rooms can change and stuff. Now that's probably someone's seen that because someone will have seen a way more horror than I have, because horror is like, I don't watch horror. That's one. Another thing would be, and we could do this very easily in D&D, is something like a fantasy game like that. Is what happens if you have this haunted location, but actually almost like every door is like a portal to another different world thing. So literally, you go through a door and you're in a completely different place. The kind of thing, you open the door and there's like, no, I don't. I shut the door again. That kind of thing. That's a haunted place. But that's
it could be interesting actually if you for the person who wants to make a map. For the person who wants to make a map, but the GM who wants to do that, a map of a house. Let's say it's a house or a castle, whatever. Multi-room structure, multi-floor. You could make a map, and you could, much like Clue, the board game, you could go number the rooms, and as people move through certain kinds of doors, if you really wanted to put a spin on things, you could randomize and just roll. You appear here, you appear there. I mean, no, but that would be like the house is doing something. The house is deciding where you go next, depending on which door you go through. But it's not necessarily the same like each door doesn't take you to the same
Yeah.
destination.
That would really mess with, like you said, because players like to map things, and then you'd be,
Sure.
wait a minute, no, but we went through that door, and so
Right.
if we went through here and turned right and right and right, we should have got back to where we were. Yeah, you should have, but
But you didn't.
Right. Well, I'm going to leave all the doors open and walk back through the doors.
No, they all have springs on them. They all close automatically.
Even if they don't close, you just, that doesn't happen. Unless you just,
something else that you could do
cool
with
like
something else that you could do with the haunted house is you could potentially, I mean, the house as the creature, as the thing is good. You could also have much like, well, I mean, some dungeons are made with competing factions. What if there are competing factions of spiritual forces, and not that there are good? I mean, they're all rotten. They just have they have they compete with one another over something that could make things kind of interesting. Add some layers and flavor, like different parts of the house operate, or different parts of the location operate differently because they're governed by a different faction of spiritual baddies.
We could also do the Scooby-Doo trope that it's not actually haunted at all. It's
actually, you know what? That's not a bad idea. I mean, well, hey,
and he would have gotten away with it if it was View Pesky Adventures.
What would prevent actually that could be kind of fun and maybe even a little cool. Like you could have for a fantasy game. What's to stop an illusionist from making an area like the old mill, by the river, making it seem haunted so people stay away from it? And really what they're doing is they're cattle rustlers or something like that. That's a great idea. They're stealing things, because that would be cool, actually, because you would, in that situation, I think the players would believe through their characters, oh yeah, that's the haunted mill. We're going to go out there and, we're going to go out there and deal with a bunch of beasties. And then they go out there and like, wait a minute, it's like this bandit crew with a couple of illusionists and some like glamored clothing that makes them appear like werewolves or something like that. Actually, that would be cool. I like that.
What other tropes have we got then? I mean, I guess the other thing is, if you kind of think of a werewolfish type trope in terms of there's someone that at certain times of the day is turning into something. So it's a spin of the bad guy, this monster, because they're not there all the time. That makes it quite difficult to track down someone that it's only at night time that they're turning into this monster, and the rest of the time they're normal. So then, how do you know who the actual
something else though, back to your point about like the one baddie. And if it is only one, like if you're tracking a werewolf, okay, or something like that, I like the idea that don't forget about the complicating factor of this thing is only what it is, a lycanthrope sometimes, and only under certain circumstances. So that makes tracking the thing challenging. I think another thing that you'd want to consider if you only wanted to have one is, let's say you're dealing with a werewolf or something like that, some kind of killer monster that's offing people in some town. You could complicate the character's investigation and tracking of the thing by having other groups and the townies and their pitchforks, they go after it in a different way, and maybe part of the threat. And that sometimes happens. We see that often in zombie movies, where one of the subtexts is like, when does man become a savage? So you could have the main threat is the thing, but the other complicating factors come from non-player characters that are mundane in nature, who react to the thing in such a way that it makes the player characters' lives more challenging or difficult. So that's another thing that I guess you could add that into any of these.
Having said zombie, that makes me think of another trope, the survival thing. I mean, I've seen that, but so it's got some zombie films are like that. Can you survive in this location in that time? Or various. I mean, there's that kind of vampire film where it's set in Alaska. Where was it? 30 Days of Night.
It's I know what you're talking about.
It's not great, but the principle's good. That you're not going to have any daylight for 30 days, and the place is overrun with with vampires,
I think
Oh, there's a film
survival
called
horror
Dog
is
Soldiers I
tough.
saw ages ago where they just had to survive again, survive into the next day. So the kind of thing where you've got a time span. If you can survive, Pitch Black as well, actually.
Yeah.
So that's kind of that's a reasonable trope that, you know, can you survive this long? The trouble is you could see that easily just as a game. Does it work if it's just you in a small enclosed location and what you're really trying to do is stop anyone coming in? I think you'd have to have something else as the impetus to not just, we're just going to stay in this building and hope nothing comes in. You'd have to have a reason to go out. Like you need one thing. Maybe we go into this and then we go into some other way to make it scarier. I think one thing that you need a lot in a lot of these horror things is you need other NPCs. You need the guy that's going to run out of the building that you're going to have to go and rescue. You need the person that's, you know, the friend or the partner, whatever of the PCs that you can kill to show that the situation is, you know, is real. Or the reason they go to the haunted mansion is because, you know, a family member has gone to the haunted mansion already. I think having those extra characters in it, because, you know, most horror films, someone's going to die and you can't kill a PC in the opening reel. What you can do, which I do like the idea of, is giving the PCs a bunch of other players to play, like an initial, you know, like the opening thing in a film, and they're going to die. Okay. And then now they're their PCs. So now they're like, and you don't have to show it.
You know, that would work in either call it like the single stalker, the single threat. That could work in that. And it could also work in a survival horror thing. The thing with survival horror is that it's horror because there's usually a subtext of that loss of control. Like civilization disappears. What do you do now? And that's very jarring and unsettling. And then there's also the loss of control as like in a zombie movie, like you become food. Nobody wants to be that. And then again, there's that subtext of what happens when when the rug gets yanked out from underneath civilization. How do people start behaving toward one another? So again, you can use. I think you're right. You need, such a game could be enhanced by having NPCs that you put to use either to demonstrate the horribleness of the situation or to point back to that question over like humanity and morality and behavior.
Have we got any other tropes, or should we have a quick think about how to actually make, because like we said, it's the vibe that makes it horror. Any more tropes, or should we have a quick look at how you got a haunted house,
you've got scary? Like the single threat stalker, you got survival horror. No, let's talk about how. Let's instead of trying to cast a really really wide net, let's focus and talk about how to make those actually creepy.
I think some of this we've already kind of alluded to. I think if you're generally trying to make, so creepy is one thing. Creepy is about the atmosphere and the tension. Yep. I think if you're going that way, you need to have highs, but you need to build it. And the best way to do it, you need creepy things, which then have like jump scare. You know, it's a cat. It's not the goblin comes, and you need those little jump scares where someone thinks it's something really bad, but it's not. But you were building the tension up to it. And then you can drop it off. You definitely need to leave anything big for the end, whether it's, we don't see the alien until the end of Alien. We don't see the shark until the end of Jaws. Again, I'm using film things. I think the same principle works in a game. The minute you can see and confront the whatever it is and have a plan, then I think you're losing a lot of it. Unless,
once the unknown becomes fully known.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a great, the great scene in Aliens when we up the ante by seeing the queen in her chamber. Okay, but then once that, like, you see the thing, and then once she rises and she's in full, then the tension lets off a little bit because it becomes something more concrete. One of the great challenges is not breaking that buildup, because the moment someone's and this is where players will destroy your well-tuned story, because someone will tell a fart joke or something stupid and it just absolutely destroys the mood. And so I think that if you want to do creepy, if you want to do shocking, if you want to do horrific, shredded bodies and stuff like that is, you can do that with less upfront player buy-in. If you want to do creepy, either you are a great storyteller who can draw people in, great mood setter, or you explicitly need buy-in. Like, hey, folks, I put a lot of work into this. I really want you to buy in. So let's keep the Monty Python crap to a nothing.
No, I think you're
It'll
absolutely right.
destroy it.
I think without the player buy-in, it's not going to work. And then for it depends on your, it depends on your players. Because if they're not scared, it's particularly if you've got a mix of people, so some of them might genuinely be finding what you're doing eerie, even if it's just noises in the background, and
Yeah.
then it's a bulging picture. There'll be other people that are just like, meh. I mean, it's like various times, like, so it doesn't work with Scott and Brian, because Scott, you can get Scott scared. Brian doesn't get scared. I remember like sitting there watching horror films, like with me, Scott, and Brian in the cinema, and me and Scott are like, oh my God, I can't watch this. And
Yeah.
Brian's like,
Yeah, some people are like that. I think either they just, for whatever reason, like maybe they don't put themselves fully into the, like, what would it be like to be in that actual situation, whatever. But yeah, some people, it's hard to do that with.
Yeah, you definitely play a buy-in. Like I said, I think a slow build's important. I
Yes.
think you use the other things at your disposal. Do use music, do use lighting, do use props, and just glimpses of things. Don't. We've already kind of said it, but like hint at things. There's scratches here. There's pools of, it's a classic stuff. Yeah. Well, pooled blood and that cell then, but yeah, just noises, and you see something out of the corner of the eye. The other good thing is to, mess with your players. They don't all have to see, a lot of notes to players. Just even if it's really nondescript, like whisper into, I'm just gonna talk to this one player.
Yeah.
That's how you can, do the psychological. That's the one thing where you can start messing with people, because that's the time. Even I can't get Brian to be scared, but I can mess with Brian by talking to Scott, and Brian knows he's missing something because he doesn't know what's going on, because I haven't told him. It could be completely like nondescript, inane stuff, but the minute one player starts feeling like, what does everybody else know that I don't know? What am I missing?
Yeah.
The old classic, making people make perception rolls for nothing.
Yeah. I think too that this would benefit, that kind of approach would benefit from more preparation by the GM on the front end. Like if you have different notes, like I think that would actually be really cool if say you walk into a room and each of the players, each of the characters sees something different. Like there's something within the maybe what's going on in the room, or what's in the room, or some perception of the room that is different. You're going to have to write that stuff up in advance. Because again, we all know this, that like you can kill mood and tension at the table. Like the moment you start flipping through a rule book, or the moment you start like writing things out. Oh, hold on. The balloon you're trying to inflate and keep tense immediately starts to deflate. But the big thing with this, and this is the hard thing, is with creepy, it has to be slow, it has to be steady, consistent, and subtle. I remember when I was running that like Catholic Avengers game, whatever you want to call it, they were going after did you ever see that ridiculous 70s horror movie with the flying spinning chrome balls?
Oh, I know what you're talking about. I've never seen it, but yeah, I am aware of it.
Oh my golly. Oh, I can't believe
Well, if it came out in the 70s, I would have been like a kid in the 80s, and I didn't watch. I got scared watching, like, I still get scared watching Ghostbusters.
How was it called? I can't believe I'm forgetting what that it was such a great schlock horror movie. Anyway,
I didn't watch horror films until I was in my 20s,
okay,
because I couldn't cope as a kid.
Anyway, Phantasm. Yes, Phantasm. So I kind of riffed off that, and there were bodies that were being stolen from Catholic cemeteries, and so they were trying to figure out what the heck was going on. And so the investigation, I think that's such a central part to a lot of horror games, is you're trying to figure out what is going on. And during the figuring out of what is going on, that's when you, the GM, are trying to lay these subtle clues that build up the creepiness. Anyway, when they finally got to the point where they were about to confront the thing, I've been trying to be creepy, trying to whatever, slow and steady, and they bought in. But I got them. I got them because in the reveal moment, I had this moment where I didn't stress the fact that it was raining, and then when the thing appeared, the rain stopped. The way I was talking I said, oh yeah. So now the rain stopped falling, and and then I mentioned how they as they were like moving through the cemetery, how they were still getting wet in the rain. And they said, well, did it stop raining? I said, no, the rain just stopped falling. So the rain had just stopped like midair. And I don't know how it was that I described it. Like it was just a cool, like unsettling moment. Like that's just not right. And I think that's one of the essential elements of horror. You have to put things, and that's why like Cthulhu is in some ways is easy. Like you present something that is fundamentally not right. It is at odds with the players and the player characters' perceptions of what is so and what can be so. And once you go outside the box of what they consider to be possible, that's when you really get to screw with them, and they get unsettled. But again, if it's too blunt and too obvious, and once it's all there, yeah, it's hard to make it scary.
Yeah, I think it's generally horror is difficult. I mean, we've kind of mentioned in the past, I don't see how you can do horror as a campaign, partly because every time the PC survive yet another horrific thing, you
Yeah,
kind of have that desensitization of like, well, we can survive. It's you're not gonna eventually you'll stop buying it. Also, the amount of work to do horror properly, like you said, that's a lot of GM prep. At
yeah,
some point, you can't keep that level up.
yeah.
And that's why, I think horror probably does work better when you've got, it's a short form thing,
Yeah.
couple of sessions,
Yep.
not running it for a campaign. Because the idea of a Call of, well, I think it's one of those things in a Call of Cthulhu campaign, all the players either die or go mad anyway. So
But you know what? Like, I think that the only way a long-term horror campaign could work is if it is heavy on investigation. Because what else? I mean, is there some kind of like major baddie that through investigation you realize you're really after, and so you're dealing with the smaller problems and things that it creates as you try to move up the chain to get it. I guess that could work, but either way, you will need players who are okay with long-term investment for eventual payoff. You can't you're not going to do that well with players who are like, I want to kick down the door, or
no.
when do I hit fourth level? You're going to need the players who are like, I'm okay with delayed gratification. I am willing to, as a player, put in the time to build this investigation and then reach the satisfaction of some kind of culmination that maybe ends in the characters being driven mad or eaten, or they win but they're shattered as people, like the ending of It. Yeah, they win but at incredible cost. Your typical gamers are probably not going to buy into that, not for the long term.
No. I don't think it depends what kind of games what they've been playing. Yeah, I think trying to 5e players are different.
No.
But
Well, that's, yeah, and so it goes back to what you just said. I think horror works best if you want to do like shock horror, a one-off. That's why Alien is so perfect for that. I think your 3 to 4 sessions, time enough to sink in to the plot, time enough to get into the characters, either pre-generated or that they made, and go do it. I had a really good time with, and I know I've mentioned this before, but Chill Third Edition, which is no longer supported, but I think you can still get it on drive-through. Third Edition had a really good investigation mechanic, either investigating a site, investigating information like in archives, or interviewing people. There were 3 different means by which you could gather information, and it worked really well. And that's the kind of game that you could do a short arc. And here's my suggestion for horror, whether it's like shock horror or whether it's creepy horror. You could make a group of characters, run a 3 to 4 session, run, and then put it aside.
yeah.
And you go play something else. And when you want a palate cleanser, you blow the dust off those characters and they have another adventure. And they can even be somewhat similar. 15 seasons of Supernatural proves that model works. But because you're not playing it all the time, you there's a degree of freshness, I think, that's preserved.
Yeah, I think it is difficult when when you try and do horror, it's so easy and tempting to take from like film or literature. But whereas you can do 15 seasons of Supernatural and occasionally have like multiple episodes being a bit creepy or a bit scary or whatever else, I just don't see how you can do that with players, because the players at some point will be like, why aren't I getting better at this?
Yeah.
Why,
Yeah.
why aren't I just taking a gun to solve all my problems?
Yeah. Well, that's where I think that if you were to try to do something longer term to get people to sink into it, you're going to need a different kind of player. I also suggest that watching horror movies is fine, watching different kinds of horror movies, but I also suggest obviously reading, to get ideas. I read a book a couple of years ago called Haunted by a guy named James Herbert. I think he's a British author, actually. And that book was really good. It was a haunted house, it had a ghost hunter, and it had some creepy twists in it that absolutely made sense. As a matter of fact, by the end of the book, I really had a sense of like, ooh, yuck. Not grossed out, but like, that's creepy because it felt so wrong. So I recommend that book as a good haunted house with a twist on the end of it. World War Z, the book. Don't watch the movie; it sucks. It's terrible. World War Z, the book, is very good. What else? What other advice can we give, or what other ideas, or maybe like reflections or experiences we had, and advice we can give based on those things?
Yeah, I mean, I think most of the stuff like I said, I haven't done horror a lot, but certainly having the right atmosphere and getting the buy-in from your players, and then just building slowly, I think is kind of key, really.
Yeah.
Definitely. Whereas I feel like I could wing a sci-fi game or a fantasy game, I would never try to just wing a horror game, because you need to have worked out exactly what's happening and why and how you're doing it. And like you said, there's nothing kills the atmosphere more than I'm just going to have to stop and read the rules,
right,
or check this or do this thing.
Yeah, once you have once there's a mood set, if you try to do that, it ain't gonna work. Let's see.
I think generally horror is just hard, and I don't think it's a thing which naturally lends itself to role playing. And this is kind of backed up by the fact that I've looked at horror on drive-through, and most of these I don't consider to be horror. We got like, it starts off with Warhammer 40,000. It's like, yeah, I know that can be scary, but it's not that scary.
No.
And then it's got, our usual vampire and werewolf. Like Call of Cthulhu's not even in the top 10.
Right.
So I feel like the downside of drive-through is that you can just tag your products with whatever genre you want it to appear in, whether it is that or isn't.
Okay, here I'll verify this. Chill Third Edition is available on drive-through. It still is available. The quick start is free. The quick start was pretty good. And there are, I don't know if, one thing that the company that had put out third edition did a nice job of is they put out a series of short adventures, free PDF adventures during the time that the thing was alive as a property. And those were for the most part, some of them were like, the stories were like weird, like I wouldn't run them, but some of them were actually very well done in terms of how, like, explaining how to do their investigative system. All the Chill second edition stuff is available also. That was similar to, but third edition was a lot better. So surprised though, it's a little pricey. $25 for the PDF seems like a lot, but
that's a good system. That's a lot of money.
I recommend, I'll put the link in there to the quick start. It's funny, actually, the last time I ran that quick start, all the player characters, they tried to like do the kick in the door and whoop the monster's ass approach, and it was a TPK. Like the house, the beastie in the house took them, and that was it. And it was funny actually, because there was some indignation in the party of the players. They're like, what? Like, duh. Like, you didn't find out what its weakness was. You You shot at it. It didn't care. Its giant dog killed you, and that's the end of it. Or maybe didn't kill you, dragged you off into the house, and that's the end of you. So that was pretty good. I'll put a link to that.
I think definitely you need a lot of things right to work horror. I mean,
Yeah.
ideally having that. This is why something like 5e is more difficult. It's easier to do horror when the players aren't capable. Like I said, like having played Alien, when they were Marines, yes, they had guns, but then it wasn't scary because they were like, well, I've got guns and we'll be okay. When they had no weapons at all, that's scarier. You have to go and cobble something together.
If they think they're capable, that can be an inroad. An on-ramp to good horror is when they think they're capable, and then you demonstrate to them that given this situation, they're actually not. Like, you might be able to kick ass with your machine gun and do all kinds of stuff like that, but guess what? That doesn't work here. That can be jarring. But I think one of the problems with 5e and your D20 level-based games is that there is this expectation of power growth. The more I play, the more powerful my character gets. And there also is an unexamined assumption that the characters will always kick ass, and not only kick ass and win, and so that makes it hard.
Yeah, it's also quite difficult. And so one thing that you ideally would have in most horror things for players is that players that will run, players that will realize that we're in too deep and we're going to run, and that almost never ever happens.
I have an idea how you could, you mentioned earlier the idea of using having some NPCs that, or would be like part-time player characters, like almost like avatar type characters for the players, where, okay, you're going to play these characters for this opening scene. So you establish to the players, this thing is horrible, but you don't reveal a lot about its nature or its capacity or its intentions or whatever. So you could present that to the players by giving them a group of, the teenagers at the lake that get absolutely horrifically dealt with, by whatever the thing is. And now it goes to the investigators. Okay, what happened. Look, we're sitting down for a horror role-playing session. We know what's going on here. But the question is, in detail, what is going on? So you could bake that in for the players so that they get, hey, listen, this thing is it's not going to respond well to you and your machine gun.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing. I think if you're going to do that, you don't want to show it, but this is possible. You see a shape. There's a shape coming out. If you're doing it right at the start, there's a shape. Right, roll. They rolled here. Okay, you don't do any damage, and then just roll a ton of dice for how much it's going to do to play. Yeah, that's 150 hit points. Oh, this character. Oh well, I guess they're dead.
Yeah.
All they know is this thing's going to be scary. But trying to set that up ahead of time is quite difficult. I mean, that was one good thing about playing what's the one where they play as kids that I played? Tales from the Loop.
Yeah.
They knew they were only playing as teenagers.
Right.
They didn't have weapons.
Right.
So there were situations where they went, well, we're not going to try and go toe to toe with these bad guys because only one of us is even remotely good at fighting. And his only weapon is his skateboard. And he's already broken that in the first game. It's like that, that was the kind of thing. So they having knowing that the players aren't that strong, in Stranger Things, they do run away a lot because at the end of the day, they are just kids. They are not walking around with guns. The minute you give people weapons, I think it does make them a bit more gung-ho.
But they have their alpha.
Well, yeah.
They have their slayer.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
All right. So I think, it is, you've got to set a lot of things up to do horror things properly, but it can be fun.
And I think that that maintaining those things is very difficult over the long term. It's easier to put in the work. On a practical side, as a GM, you put in the work. This is 3 or 4 sessions. This is one session, and I'm done with it. I think that maintaining it over time, because of the amount of work it would take from the GM and the amount of commitment and from the players, and I think that there's always the natural in every group. There is even if you step outside of the norms for the group, over time, there is going to be a natural bend back toward the norm. And so people over time are they're going to turn back into the player they typically are. But for 2 or 3 or 4 sessions, they might be able to resist that natural pull toward the mean.
I think 2D20 can be both good, like a good thing and a bad thing for doing this. Because on the one side, 2d20 lends itself to players being able to be a bit more capable because you've got this way of like spending fortune or building up threat. So if every time, I think I'm going to fail this roll, I'll build up threat. But actually, if you can get the players to waste an awful lot, build up an awful lot of threat by pointless, unlocking doors or investigation checks or perception all the way through the adventure. So you build a giant stack of threat, which you just never spend. You just never spend it. And then actually you can do things, spend the threat, not necessarily on the final encounter, but doing things like, right, I'm going to spend some threat. You're separated. What do you mean we're separated? Well, was one of you walked through the door shut and now you're separate? Oh, crap.
That would actually,
do things to mess with the players.
That'd be a good thing to establish as, hey, listen, because I mean, look, there are some adventures that I've seen that say, because of the threat level, of the danger level of this adventure, the GM starts with 3 threat per player. Okay. You could just start off with 2, but just let everyone know, listen, like in the haunted house, the longer you're in the haunted house, the more threat's going to build up.
I think I'd quite happily start with none, but in the knowledge that there's nothing that I need to spend it on to start with, but I'm going to give the players lots of opportunities of roles where they can spend threat, but things with high difficulties. So they're not going to build a ton of momentum, but they're going to be buying threat, and you can just have that nice big threat pile stacking up.
Also, though, I mean, I've done this. I have used threat, as a promise when players dither.
Yeah.
Like, you need to make up your mind. Like, you're supposed to be the expert here. I'm going to count down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. When I get to nothing, I'm going to give myself threat for you dithering.
Yeah.
But you could state that up front. Like, listen, let's say you have the impetus to adventure is someone is kidnapped and they get lost in the haunted house and you need to go find them. Well, obviously, the longer they're there, the more they're going to get corrupted, messed with, brutalized, turned into one of the legions of the undead, something like that. And so threat will naturally build up the longer you take. So just state that, and maybe attach some kind of time frame to it. But yeah, I think also, though, with 2d20 having the stress mechanic, that is, all stress is naturally regenerated at the end of every scene, that lends to the cinematic mode, but it also takes away from the horror. Maybe you could do this instead of physical wounds linger, but maybe you say, listen, as long as you're in this house, or as long as you suffer the taint of the whatever, the beastie,
your stress doesn't go away.
Or you don't recover resolve. If you're using a 2d20 system that is a split stress track, the mental side of it, that doesn't go away. Why not?
I think another thing I'd be tempted to do is to go, you don't have fortune or determination. Well, why not? It's in the rules.
Or you just have 1.
Not in this version. No, I don't even want to have 1. No, we're playing this hardcore. This is hardcore rules. None of that.
All right. Okay, that's a good idea. You could, by rationing or limiting the dramatic resources they have to be successful, that 2d20 provides, that I think makes 2d20 shine, you can crimp them a little bit and make their life more difficult, force them hopefully to make more prudent decisions as they move through things, because they recognize that their action economy is in a recession.
You could also make threat cheaper than momentum. So you could go to the like a threat's like the old school, it was just a 1-to-1, as opposed to the build and one. So players would be more tempted to buy the threat because they
that's a really good idea.
Take the easy street. I could use my. I've only got 1 point of momentum. Oh, but actually, I can do this easy with threat. You can see the other players go, no, why are we doing?
Actually, that would be. And you, the GM, you could be like the temptress, the tempter on the left shoulder, going, come on, no, hey, you know what? That would cost you 3 momentum. Would you do it for 2 threat? Could do that.
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be good.
All right.
Or start being mean. Get a different threat cost for different players. I'm going to offer you this deal, but you're not getting it. Why am I being mistreated? Yeah, turn them against each other.
Interesting. All right. Anything else?
There's some ideas. No, I think we've given some idea. Like I said, horror isn't exactly my forte, so if people found any of this useful, then job done.
I hope so. Yeah. All right, cool. And hopefully people will jump in. I would love to hear from a GM's perspective. You jump on the Discord and share your comments, or on YouTube. How have you scared your players? Because it's games that have good fear mechanics for characters. That's terrific. But have you ever actually been able to creep out your players? If so, how? Not just the thing that you did, but how did you build it up to make it happen? Because if we could share those ideas, that would be wonderful for us and creepy for them.
Suck it, players.
Thanks as always for listening to Fluff and Crunch. The link to join our Discord is in the notes to this episode. Please do chime in with your ideas, GMs or players. If you had a GM who creeped you out, who scared you, gave you the heebie-jeebies as a player, share those ideas. I think that we could all benefit from that. Something else also, if you are involved in or looking to get involved in the Modifius's 2D20 World Builders program, if you intend to write something, anything, jump in on our Discord. We would love to start putting together a list of people who are or are going to publish things. We'd love to review your stuff. We'd love to put reviews of your games and your content out there, and we'd love to just try to promote the whole program and people playing 2D20 games and adding to the list of games that exist within that system. So do that. Thanks.